The message popped up on my phone just as I was settling into my favorite armchair with a cup of coffee. Dad, I want to let you know I won't be attending the wedding. We don't want any drama. It was from David, my son. Those words hit me like a cold wave washing over a sunlit morning. I stared at the screen, the letters blurring as a knot tightened in my stomach. Not welcome. At his wedding. My own son's wedding. I set the phone down slowly, my hands trembling. The room felt suddenly smaller, colder. I had spent years trying to be the father David needed, the one who showed up at every game, who stayed late helping with school projects, who sent money when college tuition became a mountain too steep. I wasn't perfect, not by any means, but I thought I had built something solid between us. Now, those walls I'd worked so hard to raise seemed to crumble with a single text. I thought back over the years, flipping through memories like an old photo album in my mind. I remembered the late nights helping him study for exams, the trips to the hardware store when he was fixing up his first apartment, the proud smile on his face when he graduated. I had always tried to support him, even when we didn't see eye to eye. We had our disagreements, sure, but I believed that love was a foundation beneath it all. And yet here I was, excluded from what should have been one of the happiest days of my son's life. The harshness of that realization was almost unbearable. I recalled the last family gathering, the subtle exchanges that had hinted at this fracture. David's fiancée, Emily, had been distant around me, her eyes flickering away whenever I tried to join the conversation. I overheard her whisper to David something about wanting a drama-free wedding, and it stung to hear my name in that context. It wasn't just the words. It was the way they made me feel invisible, like a shadow they wanted to erase. The tension between us had been growing for months, though I hadn't seen it clearly until now. I'd noticed the phone calls that went unanswered, the canceled visits, the polite but strained smiles at family dinners. I chalked some of it up to the chaos of wedding planning, the stress that comes with blending two lives. But now, the truth was undeniable. I wasn't welcome. I tried to push away the hurt, but it clung to me, a persistent weight pressing down on my chest. I wondered what I had done wrong. Was it something I said? Something I failed to do? I replayed our last conversation, searching for clues, but all I found was silence. David was my son, and I loved him fiercely. I wanted to believe there was still a chance to mend this before the wedding day. But the more I thought about it, the clearer it became that Emily's influence was strong. I had heard whispers from family friends about her desire to keep things perfect, which seemed to mean keeping me at arm's length. I sat quietly, the coffee growing cold in my hand as I wrestled with a storm of emotions, hurt, confusion, anger, and an overwhelming sense of loss. This wasn't how I imagined this moment. I had pictured walking him down the aisle, sharing a proud father's smile, maybe even dancing awkwardly at the reception. Instead, I was left with a text and a void where my place should have been. The days that followed were a blur of muted phone calls and avoided questions. Family members danced around the topic, some casting sympathetic glances my way, others shifting uncomfortably when I brought it up. I overheard fragments of conversations. David's desire for a clean break from family drama, Emily's concerns about how my presence might disrupt the day. It felt like I was being erased from their story, a character written out without explanation. I thought about reaching out to David directly, to ask for a conversation, for understanding, but the fear of rejection held me back. What if he refused to talk? What if this was his final decision? I was torn between wanting to fight for my place in his life and wanting to protect myself from further pain. Late one night, I found myself scrolling through old photos on my phone, snapshots of birthdays, holidays, and quiet moments we had shared. I smiled through tears at the memory of David's first steps, his graduation day, the time we built a treehouse together. Those moments were real and they mattered, but they couldn't change the message on my screen. I realized that this was more than just a wedding invitation. It was a signal of shifting tides in our relationship. David was becoming his own person, influenced by new relationships and new priorities. I had to accept that the family I knew was changing and that I might not have a say in every part of it. Still, the wound was fresh and raw. I spent nights staring at the ceiling, wondering how to hold on to hope without being swallowed by despair. I wasn't ready to give up on my son, but I needed to find a way to cope with the reality before me. The thought of the wedding day loomed ahead like a distant storm. I pictured the venue, the guests, the joyful celebration that I would not be part of. It was a bitter pill to swallow. But beneath the pain, a small flame of determination flickered. I couldn't control their choices, but I could control how I responded. As the days passed, I started to notice subtle signs that David was conflicted. A cousin mentioned that he had seemed uneasy when the topic came up, that he sometimes glanced at his phone as if wanting to call me, but stopping himself. It wasn't much, but it was enough to keep me from giving up entirely. I thought about Emily and the role she played in this. I wasn't sure if she meant to hurt me or if she was simply trying to protect her own vision of a perfect day. Either way, it felt like I was caught in the crossfire, a casualty of their new life together. I sat by the window one afternoon, watching the neighborhood kids play, wishing for a simpler time when my relationship with David was uncomplicated. The weight of rejection pressed down on me, but I reminded myself that love wasn't always about being invited to the party. Sometimes it was about waiting patiently for a door to open. I knew the road ahead wouldn't be easy. There would be more silence, more distance, and more moments of doubt. But I wasn't ready to let go. I held on to the hope that somewhere beneath the surface, my son still remembered who I was, the father who loved him, who had always tried to be there. And so, with a heavy heart but stubborn spirit, I prepared to face the coming days. The wedding would happen with, or without me. But my story with David was far from over. The days stretched on, each one marked by a quiet ache that settled deeper in my chest. I kept hoping for a call, a message, anything from David that might soften the blow. But the silence was final, unyielding. Invitations had been sent out, and mine was nowhere to be found. The wedding was moving forward, without me. The finality of it hit harder when I confirmed through a mutual family friend that my name was deliberately left off the guest list. That was the moment I realized this wasn't a passing disagreement or a misunderstanding. This was a decision set in stone. The hurt was raw, but beneath it, something else stirred, a resolve. I had to accept the reality, but I refused to let it define me or my future. I wasn't going to chase after a relationship that was closed off to me, at least not for now. Instead, I turned inward, determined to reclaim my sense of self beyond the role of a rejected father. I started planning a trip, something I had always dreamed of but postponed for years. A solo journey to the mountains, where I could breathe fresh air and find some peace. The idea of packing a bag and stepping into the unknown was both terrifying and exhilarating. It was a chance to focus on healing, to rediscover parts of myself that had been overshadowed by the pain of family strife. I reached out to old friends I hadn't spoken to in a while, reconnecting over coffee and long conversations that reminded me of who I was outside of my identity as David's dad. I dusted off my guitar, something I hadn't touched since my younger days, and let the music fill the silence that had grown too loud in my mind. Small acts, but they felt like stitches mending a frayed heart. I made peace with the fact that I couldn't control David's decisions, only my response to them. That didn't mean I stopped loving him. If anything, the love remained complicated and painful but true. I told myself that healing didn't mean forgetting or pretending the hurt wasn't there. It meant learning to live with it, to move forward without letting it consume me. Just as I was beginning to find a fragile balance, a call came through that I wasn't expecting. It was Sarah, David's sister. Her voice was hesitant but warm, and I sensed she was walking a delicate line. She told me she had been watching everything unfold and wanted to share something that might explain David's behavior, though she cautioned it was just her perspective. Emily's influence is strong, she said softly. David's caught between wanting to please her and wanting to keep the family peace. I think he's struggling more than he lets on. Her words were a bomb and a puzzle all at once. It gave me a glimmer of hope that maybe David wasn't as resolute in his rejection. Sarah's insight reminded me that relationships are never simple, especially when new people enter the picture. It wasn't just about me or David. It was about all the complex ties that bind and sometimes pull apart families. I realized that David might be torn, and that gave me something to hold on to, a thread of possibility. Encouraged by Sarah's call, I didn't rush to reach out to David immediately. Instead, I used the time to strengthen my own foundation. I journaled my thoughts, letting the raw emotions spill onto the pages so they wouldn't overwhelm me internally. I meditated, trying to quiet the storm inside, and I spent time outdoors, feeling the earth beneath my feet as a reminder that life goes on, even when it feels like it's crumbling. I also began to set boundaries for myself. I decided that, for now, I would not confront David or Emily directly about the wedding. I needed space to heal, not more conflict. This wasn't giving up. It was choosing self-preservation. I wanted to be ready, whenever the time came, to approach the situation with calm and clarity, not anger or desperation. As the wedding day drew nearer, I felt a strange mixture of detachment and anticipation. I knew I wouldn't be invited, but I also knew that this distance didn't have to mean the end. People change, circumstances shift, and sometimes time is the only thing that can heal deep wounds. I thought about the trip again, the solitude, the fresh perspectives, the chance to step away from the pain and perhaps see things in a new light. It became a symbol of hope, a personal journey that wasn't dependent on anyone else's choices. One afternoon, as I was packing a small bag, my phone buzzed with a message from an unknown number. It was from a close friend of David's, someone I barely knew but who seemed to understand the situation. "David's been asking about you," the message read. "He's not sure how to handle things, but misses having you around." The word stirred something inside me, a bittersweet reminder that the door might not be completely closed. I didn't reply immediately. Instead, I let the message sink in and reminded myself to be patient. Relationships, especially those strained by hurt, don't mend overnight. They require time, understanding, and sometimes the courage to let go for a while. In the quiet moments, I pictured David on his wedding day, standing at the altar with Emily, surrounded by friends and family. I imagined the smiles, the laughter, the promises made. I wanted to be happy for him, even if I wasn't part of it. Love, I reminded myself, was bigger than presence or absence. So I made a promise to myself to live fully, to heal authentically, and to be ready for whatever the future might hold. Whether that meant rebuilding bridges with David or accepting a new kind of relationship, I would face on my own terms. With the trip planned, my heart a little lighter, and a newfound resolve, I stepped into the unknown. Not just the mountains I was headed for, but the uncertain path of a father's love trying to find its way back home. Word traveled faster than I expected. The news of my exclusion from David's wedding spread through family circles and mutual friends like wildfire, igniting a quiet storm of opinions and whispered judgments. Some people reached out with sympathy, their voices soft and understanding when they asked if I was okay. Others, however, seemed to take sides with David and Emily, convinced that my presence would have been a source of disruption. It was as if my absence had become a polarizing statement, and suddenly I was caught in a social rift I hadn't asked for. I chose silence in public, unwilling to stir the pot or fan the flames of gossip. Social media was a minefield of half-truths and assumptions, and I refused to engage in back and forth that so often leaves everyone bruised and bitter. Instead, I confided in a handful of close friends who had stood by me through thick and thin. Their support was quiet but steady, a tether to reality when the world felt unsteady. One afternoon, I found myself sitting across from Dr. Lane, a counselor my friend had recommended. I hadn't sought therapy before, but the weight of rejection and the fracturing of my family pushed me to try. Her office was warm, filled with soft light and the scent of lavender. We spoke for hours, peeling back layers of pain I hadn't fully acknowledged. She asked gentle questions that made me confront my own expectations and the shifting nature of my relationship with David. "What do you want from him?" she asked. "And what are you willing to accept?" The questions lingered long after our session ended. I realized that part of me wanted to hold on to the past, the father who had been a constant in David's life. But another part understood that people change and relationships evolve, sometimes in ways we can't control. It was a bitter truth, but also a necessary one. Back home, the atmosphere was heavy with unspoken tension. Family gatherings became exercises in diplomacy, with conversations carefully avoiding the elephant in the room. I noticed how some relatives would glance at me with pity, while others offered distant smiles. as if unsure where their loyalty should lie. One evening, at a small dinner with a few close family members, the topic came up indirectly. A cousin mentioned how David had insisted on a perfect day, free from anything that might cause discomfort. The phrase echoed in my mind, a perfect day that excluded me. It was a sharp reminder of how much I had been written out of this chapter. Late at night, I found myself alone with my thoughts, reflecting on my role as a father and the shifting dynamics with my son. I remember the early years when everything had seemed simpler, when love was expressed in hugs and bedtime stories. Now, it was complicated by distance, misunderstandings, and unspoken grievances. But despite the hurt, I began to accept that love doesn't always look the way we expect it to. It's not always about grand gestures or shared celebrations. Sometimes it's quiet and patient, waiting for the right moment to be acknowledged. I spent those quiet moments journaling, trying to make sense of the tangled emotions inside me. I wrote about my fears, my hopes, and the deep well of love that still connected me to David, even if it was strained. It was a way to hold on to myself amid the chaos. I also found solace in small routines, morning walks, tending the garden, listening to old records that reminded me of better days. These simple acts grounded me, giving me space to breathe and heal. One afternoon, as I was walking through the neighborhood park, I overheard a conversation between two parents discussing the wedding. They spoke in hushed tones about the drama surrounding it, mentioning Emily's determination to keep things clean, and David struggled to balance family expectations with his new life. It wasn't the whole story, but it confirmed what I had begun to suspect, that David was caught in a difficult position. That knowledge both comforted and saddened me. I wished he could have shared his struggles with me instead of shutting me out. But I understood the pressures he faced and the choices he felt forced to make. I realized that this distance between us was not just about me or David. It was about the complexities of blending lives, the challenges of change, and the pain that often accompanies growth. As the wedding day approached, I felt a mixture of emotions, sadness, loneliness, and a quiet determination to find peace within myself. I knew that I might never fully understand decisions made, but I could choose how to carry the weight of those decisions. I decided to focus on my own well-being, refusing to let bitterness take root. I sought out moments of joy wherever I could find them. A call with an old friend, a book that transported me to another world, a simple cup of tea on a quiet morning. In the midst of the turmoil, I also began to imagine a future where my relationship with David could evolve beyond this pain. It wouldn't be the relationship I once imagined, but perhaps it could be something new, fragile, imperfect, but real. I held on to that hope, even when it felt like a faint flicker in the dark. The days leading up to the wedding were filled with a strange stillness. I kept myself busy but never stopped thinking about David and the life he was building. I wondered if he ever thought of me, if he missed the connection we once had. But rather than dwell on what was lost, I chose to prepare myself for whatever might come next. I reminded myself that love is not possession. It's freedom. Freedom to change, to grow, and sometimes to let go. And so I waited, not for an invitation or an apology, but for the moment when healing could begin. It was a week before the wedding when the unexpected knock came at my door. I wasn't expecting visitors, especially not from David, but there he stood, framed by the dim porch light, hesitation written across his face. For a moment, I couldn't speak. The years of distance, the silence, the messages unsent, all came crashing in, leaving me both stunned and wary. He stepped inside quietly, closing the door behind him with a soft click. We sat across from each other in the living room, the air thick with unspoken words. David looked older, more burdened than the son I remembered, and that weight unsettled me. I waited, unsure if he'd find the courage to speak. Finally, he broke the silence. "Dad, I wanted to talk. I know things have been messy, and I'm sorry. I didn't mean to hurt you." His voice was low, edged with vulnerability. I nodded, feeling the knot in my throat loosen just a bit. He told me about the pressure he'd felt. From Emily, from family, from himself. She wants everything perfect. I want that too, but it's been hard balancing what everyone expects. He looked down, ashamed but honest. I'm torn between wanting a drama-free day and knowing that excluding you might have been wrong. Hearing him say these words was both a relief and a fresh wound. The pain of exclusion still lingered, but beneath it, I sensed his struggle, his confusion. This wasn't a simple matter of choosing sides. It was a tangled web of emotions and loyalties. I found my voice, steady but gentle. David, I've always wanted to be there for you, to support you. It hurt when I wasn't invited, but I understand this isn't easy for you either. I reached out, placing a hand on his. I don't want to be a source of pain. I want us to find a way forward, even if it's different from what we imagined. He looked up, eyes glistening. I miss you, Dad, more than I realized, and I'm sorry for shutting you out. There was a rawness in his apology that touched something deep within me. We talked for hours that night, peeling back layers of hurt and misunderstanding. We didn't solve everything, and the tension of the upcoming wedding still hung over us, but the walls between us began to crumble. For the first time in a long while, we shared a moment of genuine connection. Before he left, we agreed to keep the lines of communication open. There was no promise of perfect reconciliation, no guarantee that I would be part of the ceremony, but there was a commitment to try, to rebuild, slowly and carefully. After David left, I sat in the quiet room, the weight of the conversation settling around me. I realized that healing isn't a straight path. It's full of twists, setbacks, and small victories. Tonight was one of those victories. In the days that followed, I found myself thinking less about the wedding itself and more about the future. The reception was approaching, and while I wasn't sure if I'd be there, I knew I wanted to support David in some way. It was a chance to show that love can persist even when circumstances change. I reached out to a few close family members to let them know I was open to attending the reception. Their responses were cautious but encouraging, a reminder that while some wounds run deep, others are ready to heal. I also began preparing myself emotionally for possibility that I might not be part of the celebration at all. Acceptance was becoming a steady companion, guiding me through the uncertainty with a quiet strength. One afternoon, as I was walking to the neighborhood, I caught a glimpse of David's fiancée, Emily, at a cafe. Our eyes met briefly, and though the tension between us was palpable, I chose to nod in acknowledgement rather than retreat. It was a small step, but it felt important, a gesture of goodwill amid complicated feelings. That evening, I sat down to write a letter to David. Not to send, but to organize my thoughts. I poured out my feelings, the hurt, the hope, the desire for understanding. Writing gave me clarity, helping me separate my emotions from the situation itself. I realized that this journey was as much about my own growth as it was about repairing our relationship. I was learning to balance love with boundaries, hope with reality. The night before the wedding, I found myself reflecting on how far we'd come. There was still pain, yes, but also a fragile hope that maybe, just maybe, this wasn't the end of our story. I went to bed with a quiet heart, ready to face whatever tomorrow would bring. The wedding day arrived with a sky so clear it felt like the world had pressed a reset button. I woke early, nerves and anticipation weaving through me like a restless thread. After months of uncertainty, I had made my decision. I would attend the reception, even if the ceremony itself was closed to me. It wasn't the presence I had originally dreamed of, but it was a step forward, a way to honor David's wishes while still showing my support. I dressed carefully, choosing a suit that once belonged to my father, a subtle reminder of the legacy of family that stretched through generations. As I looked in the mirror, I saw a man shaped by both loss and hope, carrying scars but refusing to be defined by them. Arriving at the venue, I felt a swirl of emotions, pride, sadness, relief. The place buzzed with laughter and music, the air thick with celebration. I caught glimpses of familiar faces, some offering warm smiles, others hesitant glances. I reminded myself that this was a new beginning, a chance to build a future different from the past. The reception hall was beautifully decorated, soft lights casting a golden glow. I found a seat near the back, wanted to stay out of the spotlight, but close enough to be part of the moment. David and Emily entered hand in hand, radiant and glowing with happiness. For a moment, I simply watched, a swell of love rising in my chest despite the bittersweet circumstances. Throughout the evening, I exchanged quiet conversations with family and old friends, sharing stories and laughter that felt like balm to my soul. David approached me several times, each meeting brief but meaningful. We didn't talk about the past or the wedding ceremony. Instead, we focused on the present, small acknowledgments, tentative connections. At one point, David pulled me aside. "Thank you for being here," he said softly. "It means more than I can say." His eyes held a mix of gratitude and regret, and I nodded, feeling the weight of those words settle between us. Emily joined us briefly, offering a polite smile. I sensed the boundaries still in place, but also a willingness to coexist peacefully. It wasn't perfect, but it was progress. As the night wore on, I found myself reflecting on the journey that had brought me here, the rejection, the silence, the painful growth. I realized that love isn't always about grand moments or perfect celebrations. Sometimes it's about showing up even when the path is uncertain and the future unclear. I thought about the man I had been before all this, the hopeful father imagining a traditional wedding day with his son, and the man I had become, someone who understood that relationships evolve, that love can take many forms, and that sometimes peace is the greatest gift we can give ourselves and others. When the music slowed and the crowd began to disperse, I felt a quiet contentment. I had reclaimed my space in David's life, not in the way I once envisioned, but in a way that honored both of us. Later, back at home, I found a letter slipped under my door. It was from David, his handwriting familiar and shaky. He told me he had named his daughter after me, a gesture that filled me with a complex mix of emotions, pride, surprise, a gentle sadness. I read the letter over and over, but I didn't respond immediately. Instead, I let the words settle in my heart, neither clinging to anger nor grasping for joy. I simply let it be. I stepped outside and walked along the beach near my home, feeling the cool breeze on my face and the steady rhythm of the waves beneath my feet. The horizon stretched endless and open, a reminder that life moves forward, carrying us toward new beginnings. In that moment, I chose peace over turmoil. I chose to embrace the life I was creating for myself, one shaped by healing, acceptance, and hope. I didn't know where David and Emily would end up or what the future held for us, but I was content with my own happiness, knowing that I had reclaimed my identity and my place in this ever-changing story. And that was enough.